Thanks for listening to Exploring the Wineglass podcast, the podcast for people who love wine. I'm Lori Budd, a UC Davis winemaking program and WSET Level 2 graduate. You can find Exploring the Wineglass on all the socials as well as your favorite podcast catchers. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. I promise I'll never tell you what to drink, but I'll always share what's in my glass. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Exploring the Wineglass. Today, on Allure of the Poor, I am sitting down with Maria from Wine and Cheese Friday to get the scoop on all things cheese. If you are anything like me, there is no better meal than a nice glass or two, maybe three, of wine paired with cheese. That right there is my happy place. So join me as I learn about the types of cheese, why there's ash in cheese, whether you eat that rind or not, and what the heck Miss Muffet was sitting on her tuffet eating. So unscrew, uncork, or saber a bottle and enjoy. And I'm going to ask, please take a moment to swipe on your phone to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever you listen in. It really does make a difference. And here is the latest review. 5 stars. I love listening to Exploring the Wineglass because the guests are from around the globe. Each time I listen, I feel like I get a little glimpse into the life of a winemaker. Lori is a fantastic host and a winemaker herself. She has the expertise to explain complicated wine terms and ask meaningful questions. Thank you, Emma2398, for those kind words. Now, let's get to cheese. Hey everybody, welcome to Allure of the Poor, sponsored by Dracaena Wines, and I'm very excited today. First, with all of this pandemic stuff going on, it has been a long time since we have done an Allure of the Poor, although I really don't understand why that is because that's always done over the conference call. But hey, I don't know. I can't answer those big world questions. But tonight I have Maria from Wine Cheese Friday, and she is the cheese guru. So I have to say that, when I have a cheese question, I am, asking her. She is the person that I go to. And anybody who follows my blog, Exploring the Wineglass, or knows me personally, knows that, there is no better dinner for me than cheese and wine. That is ideal dinner for me. Pizza plays a very, very close second, neck and neck for me, but that's cheese too, because, that's just lots of cheese. So, Maria, welcome, and why don't you do a little brief introduction of yourself?
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Maria from Wine and Cheese Friday, and I write about wines, cheeses, and all things related. We've gone wine tasting, cheese tasting, we've gone to farms. We really just enjoy wine and cheese and learning all about it. This is a website that my husband Neil and I run, and we've been doing it for over 7 years and have done over 150 wine and cheese pairings. I think that helps with how I know so much about cheese now.
It's a tough job, as they say, but, somebody's got to sacrifice themselves to do that for us all.
Yep. That's right.
So tell me first off, how did you get into cheese? Were you into cheese and then said, oh, let me, wine kind of goes with cheese, or were you into wine and were like, oh, you know what, let me try this cheese?
Well, I decided back in, I think it was 2012, I didn't want to work in the lab anymore. I'm trained with a degree in biotechnology, and I just didn't want to work in the lab. I was done with it. I was reading an article one day, and it was about wineries, and I was like, I could work at a winery. I've done sales, I've done production, I've done customer service, I've done quality assurance. I've done things in the field where I had to work with plants. I'm like, oh my God, I've done everything that is a winery. I should go work at a winery. So as luck would have it, there was one 45 minutes from my house. So Neil and I actually just crafted an email and said, hi, I'm Maria, I'm Italian, I'm smart, and I want to work at your winery. And I guess the rest is history. So my first learning experience was wine. After I worked at the winery for about a year, we decided we wanted to move to California. And when I got to California, I was like, oh boy, I only know Florida wine. I need to up my game and start Wine and Cheese Fridays so that I can learn about every wine I can find and write down notes, and then I have a way that I'm going to learn. And as luck would have it, there was a ton of cheese in California also, and I was like, well, I always heard that wine and cheese went together, and I eat cheese, so let's just, put them together and have that be the website. So wine came first, but to be honest, when we do the pairings now, I really haven't found a cheese that I've not liked. Every single cheese that we've had, I'm like, oh my God, I love this. This is the best cheese ever. And, that's why I've learned so much about it, because there's just, it's just like wine. Anytime you think you know what you're talking about, then you're like, oh my goodness, there's like so many more levels to this than I ever realized. And okay, now I'm going to learn more.
Right. And that is true. And, little sidebar, we have the same kind of history because I did microbiology and learned very quickly that I cannot be in a lab. Like, I cannot be in a lab. So I can relate completely to that. And yes, exactly. And the same thing, with the wine, with every time you think you know something, you learn, oh, well, okay, I know that, but here's 10 other things that I didn't know. And then you try to learn those 10 things, and now, here's 20 things I didn't know. But luckily for us, wine and cheese is pretty darn good way to keep trying to learn. Exactly. I'm sorry, I just have to have another sip. I just need to have another, bite of this. It's education.
Right. I'm learning right now. This is all for education. Exactly.
Right. So let's start off with, what exactly is cheese? How do you define what cheese is?
Cheese is super complex, actually. Once you start really digging into it, like I said, you think you know it, and then you're like, oh my God, what did I even think I knew, because I know nothing at all. But really, the super simple definition is that cheese is milk that gets heated up with bacteria, rennet, and salt. That's cheese. That's the basic deal. But one of the things that I wanted to make sure I brought up kind of right away, because I just said the word rennet is an ingredient in cheese that actually comes from the inside of animals' stomachs. And so that means that cheese really isn't vegetarian in all cases, but there is a vegetarian rennet that comes from mushrooms. So there are definitely cheeses that are vegetarian, but just for the vegetarians out there, they might want to keep in mind that if they're like pretty strict vegetarians, and maybe not vegan, but just pretty strict vegetarians, they want to know that there is an animal product involved in cheese, other than the milk.
I was going to say, but the milk, the milk is coming from an animal. So, but I don't see, now I don't know, because people ask me if I'm a vegetarian because I don't eat meat. But I'll eat meat. I just don't like it, so, I mean, and besides, well, I take that back, because if you put some very well-baked bacon, I'm eating that whole platter, but like, I don't eat beef. I don't like the taste of it. I don't eat veal. But I don't classify myself as a vegetarian because, well, I do eat bacon. I'll eat sausage. And I'll eat chicken if it's hidden, so like if it's in chicken Parmesan, I'll eat it. But I don't eat, like, I'm not going to, I'm not taking a chicken wing or a chicken leg.
Or anything like that.
No.
Yeah.
No, it must be hidden. So really, cheese, like you always hear curds and whey, right? So every time I think of cheese, it's little Miss Muffet sat on her tuffet eating her curds and whey. Like I'm guessing they just said curds and whey instead of cheese, or can you eat curds and whey?
Curds and whey, I think back then was kind of like cottage cheese. I'm pretty sure it was like curds in a liquid. So I think that there was a curds and whey. But, I mean, there's a ton of things that I could tell you about milk if we want to get a little more into that before we get back into what the curds and whey are. I don't know. But one of the things about milk that I definitely wanted to point out was that this might seem super obvious and simple, but the only way that you have milk from an animal is because the animal just had a baby. And that also means that you only have milk from girl animals. And those two things seem totally obvious, but I went to a dairy farm once, and when they said that to me, it like nearly hit me like a ton of bricks or something, because I was like, I never really considered that at a dairy farm, it's basically just girl animals, and that they're girl animals that had babies. So anyways, I know that's a sidebar to your curds and whey, but that was something I wanted to make sure I mentioned, because it just was like a funny thing that you don't really think about when you're thinking about milk, because I don't know. I mean, I feel like milk is like, it's a grocery, so you don't really think about the farm or anything like that. Right. So it's nice to bring the animals back into it also, just to think about that.
Now, they do. Now, I don't know if you can answer this because it's not really cheese, but now there's no way that these cows can constantly be giving birth. So there's got to be some way that they're extending the lactating of that cow to an extended amount.
Right. Well, actually, they do give birth like pretty much every year. So,
these poor cows.
And I believe it was saying that the milk would be produced for like at least 6 months to a year after they gave birth. So it's pretty much they give birth, they have the milk, and then they just give birth again. Oh. And they just keep going over and over and over in the cycle, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, but, I do love my milk. I drink a lot of milk, but that I shouldn't have asked that question because I knew that was really the answer, and that upsets me.
Right.
These poor guys.
And I mean, there's so many tangents we could go on. So I mean, I apologize if I'm putting us out on one right now. But
it's all right. All right, so let's talk about a little bit of the history of cheese. Like, when did cheese start? Like with wine, it was purely, humans did not invent wine. Humans found wine. So how does it work? How did cheese come about onto this planet?
Well, cheese has been around for a really long time, obviously, just like everything else that we've got out there. And it was actually a peasant food at first. One of the things that people figured out was that if you had a cow and you milked it, you could have milk and cheese, kind of like we said, over and over and over. But if you ate the meat of the cow, you'd have to get another cow. So it was a peasant food. It wasn't anything that was like fancy. I mean, there was cheeses that are called like farm fresh cheeses, where they don't age it, and it's just kind of, they mix it up and it's cheese and it's done. But I'm pretty sure one time I was reading about like the history of cheese, and definitely blue cheese was that somebody like put their sandwich off to the side and kind of forgot about it, and when they came back it was blue cheese, and they were like, oh, this is good. So, I mean, it's kind of funny when you think about it like that, but I mean, like, the cheese production that we all hear about. I would say it's probably about 400 years old. And a lot of people, just like wine, made cheese in Europe, and that's like the place where you hear about where cheese is from, and it's from France, and it's from Italy, and it's from the United Kingdom, and all of those places made cheese in the beginning. So the history of cheese, I would say what just started out with people had cows on their farm, and they made cheese because it was a way for the milk to last longer. So they were excited about that because then the cheese basically made the milk be preserved, and so they could have food longer.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Pretty cool. All right, so let's get into how exactly is cheese made? And is there such a thing as fast cheese versus a slow cheese? And then if there is, like, what makes the difference between being classified, for lack of a better word, as a fast cheese or a slow cheese?
All right, so we'll start with how is cheese made. So cheese is made by heating up the milk and having the bacteria and the rennet added into there. Like we said, rennet is the enzyme from the animal, and that's what separates into the curds and whey. We were already talking about the curds and whey. So the curds are the solid part, and they are on the top of the pot when you're cooking the cheese. And the whey is just a bunch of liquid that's on the bottom of the pot. And it actually takes 10 pounds of milk to make 1 pound of cheese. So the whey is huge. And some cheesemakers just throw the whey away. And other cheesemakers make bread out of it. You can like water your tomato plants. You can turn it into like feed for animals and stuff like that. So, I mean, there's a lot of whey produced in the end when you're making cheese. But basically, you curdle the milk to create the curds. And then after you have the curds, you scoop them into something called a form. And they call it a form and not a mold because mold is mold in cheese, and they don't want things to get confusing talking about the mold versus the form. You basically just have the curds and you scoop them into the form, and that gives you the shape. And it's really funny because I've actually seen quite a few cheeses that are in the shape of a heart. So I guess the heart form is a popular one. So you can have a heart cheese. But yeah, you scoop them into the form. Whey, more of the whey drains out when it's in the form because it has holes on the bottom of it. And to your point of a fast cheese versus a slow cheese, that's the basic process for making the cheese. Like I said, you heat it up, you add the bacteria, the rennet, you get the curds, you scoop them into the form, and pretty much that is cheese. But when you're talking fast cheese versus slow cheese, those are the same steps that you would use for a chev, which is like a log of goat cheese, and you can make that all in one day. You scoop it in, it drains. It does take a while. It takes like 4 hours for the draining to happen in the chev. But then once that's drained out, you basically just roll it into a ball or a log or whatever, and it's chev. It's done. So that's fast and that's easy. You do those same steps if you wanted to make a camembert, which is like a brie, but then a camembert is aged. So once you get the cheese curds into the form and it drains the whey out, then you put it on a drying rack and you let it dry until it doesn't feel too wet anymore. You can actually feel the difference on it. It takes like a day. You just like sit it out basically on the counter or on a drying rack or in a convection oven or something like that. And then once you declare that you're ready to age it because it's not wet anymore, you put it into wherever you're going to age it. In the cheese class that I took, we learned about how you could use like a little cube fridge like you had in the dorm and just turn it up to the highest setting, and that could be your cheese cave. It's around 50 degrees then, and with the camembert in particular, you leave that there for like a month. And you have to flip it over every day so that you get equal distribution of air around it and the mold growing on it and everything like that. So that would be a slower cheese because it takes like a month, but you do the exact same thing to make it pretty much as you do the chev. One other one is cheddar, and I just wanted to bring it up because cheddar is kind of crazy, even though if you haven't made cheese, you don't really know that it is. But cheddar actually takes like twice as long to make as any of the other cheeses do. And the reason for that is because cheddar is also a verb in addition to a noun, and to cheddar your curds means that you make a whole bunch of mats out of the curds, like physical like layers, and then you stick them all on top of each other, and then like a half an hour goes by and you stick them the other way, and then another half an hour goes by and then you stick them the other way, and you keep doing that.
Oh my gosh.
And then you cut it all up into what people have seen as cheese curds, like those little balls of cheese that are a cheese curd that's not like our little Miss Muffet story. And then you put all of that into the form, and you press that, and you do all of that. So it's actually like this giant thing, and that's why cheddar is a verb. But again, it does start initially with those same rules with the cooking and all of that. So different cheeses, depending on what the cheese is, definitely have different time frames. And if you want to say when it's a cheese, like how do you know that it's a cheese versus milk or whatever, those steps that I was just mentioning are all the different ideas behind that. Because like it's a cheese once you have the curds. That's it. That curds equals cheese. But it might not be your cheddar, or it might not be your camembert or whatever, because there's all those other steps at the end involved for it to become what it is you set out to make. But it is cheese once it's curdled. So cheddar, I would think that to me sounds so labor intensive. It's like the croissant of cheese, right? I mean, if anybody's ever made croissants, oh my God, you know. But cheddar isn't really a very expensive cheese. So it's not really relative to the length of time or labor intensiveness of it, is it? Well, I mean, that kind of goes back, I think, to like where the cheese is from and who's making the cheese when it comes to the cheddar. Because I've heard that there's some of those steps that are either skipped or mechanized so that it's really not that big a deal to make a cheddar. Okay. But when you're doing those handmade cheddars, or like you've heard of maybe a bandaged cheddar, or like really aged cheddar or something like that, chances are they probably go through all those steps, because the other thing about making cheese is so relatable to wine. If you make a cheese and you go through all this work, and then you have to wait a year or 2 years or right. whatever, if it's a really aged cheese, and then in the end you go, oh, this didn't come out right. Like, what did I do?
Right.
So it's totally the same thing as wine. I mean, like, you really have to pay attention to all those steps in the beginning, because the aging part of it is so labor intensive itself and just such a long process that you have to make sure you do it right. And they actually talk about making what they call a make sheet. And that's like where you write all your notes while you're doing the process of making the cheese, so that if you say like, oh no, I heated it up for 4 hours and I was only supposed to heat it up for 2 or whatever, you might have like those happy accidents where you're like, oh, but it's so much better. Like, oh, now I'm going to cook it for 4 hours.
Right.
Like, but if you don't write those notes and then 2 years later you look at it, or even 30 days later,
right.
like, you're not going to know.
You're not going to remember. No way. All right. So in biology, we have, the King Philip came over for great sex, where K is kingdom and phylum and all of that stuff. And, I don't know how it changes, but when I was in school, there were 5 kingdoms. Now there's 6. So this is like a hierarchy. This is like a hierarchy of taxonomy of living organisms. So cheese technically, right, is a living organism because it has the organisms in there. Is there such a hierarchy for cheese? You know, like besides just like, let's start off with different milk, right? So that's probably a main classification. So what can we have in terms of milk choices?
So there are actually a lot of different milks that are used in cheese, but I would say three main ones are goat, cow, and sheep. Just to put out a couple examples, a goat cheese example would be that chev log that you spread on a cracker, or spread on a piece of bread or something like that. A cow cheese would be cheddar, mozzarella. There's one called comte, that's like a French cheese.
Yum, yum.
A sheep cheese, the most common one that everybody knows, whether they realize it or not, is manchego. Manchego is always made from sheep's milk. But then you can mix the milks together. There's a brand that we really like that's from Italy called Luigi Gufanti. They make a lot of different cheeses that are called roviolas, which that name comes from the area in Italy where they are. That's any of the cheeses that they make are roviola because they're from that area. But it's really funny because they just call it like 2 milk or 3 milk. It's like Luigi Gufanti, 2 milk, roviola. So you don't usually know or think about the mixture of the milks there. But some of the other cheese milks that maybe you've never thought of, buffalo is one that definitely comes in. People heard of buffalo mozzarella. That is from a buffalo. Like, that's buffalo milk. There's reindeer cheese. There's camel cheese. There's yak cheese. I have not had any of those three, so I don't have any experience with them. I was trying to think if
technically
I had a reindeer
any mammal.
No, I've not had a reindeer cheese.
No. But technically any mammal, right? Right? Because mammals lactate once they give birth. I mean, you technically, going to use whatever animal you have in your backyard, depending on what part of the country.
Whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But as far as how they're classified, there's a million ways that cheeses are classified. I mean, there's cheese classified by the milk. There's cheese classified by the texture. There's cheese classified by the rind. There's cheese classified by the country that makes it. So as a general thing, there really isn't a general classification. But I have heard before that there's 7 types of cheese, and those are when they're classified by rind. So the 7 types, I don't have a story with it like King Philip.
Wait, the rind is what goes around it, right?
The rind is on the outside, yeah. So there's a fresh cheese. Like we said, again, I'm talking a lot about chev, but I've made chev, and a lot of people know it. So that's your fresh cheese. You make it, it's done, you eat it. It's all ready to go. Aged fresh cheeses also, and those have a wrinkly rind around them. I actually had one that was called Cannonball, and it was a goat cheese with a wrinkly rind around it, and it was from Indiana. It was really good. Then there's the ones that are the soft white cheeses that are also called soft ripened cheese, and those are the brie and the camembert. So we've got fresh, aged fresh, soft ripened. Then our next one is semi-soft, and that's Munster and Edam. They're not hard, but they're not soft. They're semi-soft. And you might see some of those have the orange rind on them also. Those are the washed rind cheeses. They would fall into that category too. Then there's the hard cheese, which the hard cheese is Parmesan, Manchego. Those are, again, easy to think of. We've all heard of or seen a hard cheese. There's blue cheese. Some examples of blue cheese are Roquefort, Gorgonzola. I mean, blue cheese is pretty easy to spot, so that's not really a hard one to figure out the classification. We've got one more in our grouping of 7, and that's flavor-added cheeses. So any of the truffle cheeses that people have had, those are a big deal. People love when they have a truffle cheese, but because it's a truffle, it's like 8 times more expensive because it has truffles in it. One of the times we made cheese, we added coffee grinds into it, and we've done other ones where you add other spices into it also. So those would all be the flavor added cheeses.
So like the beer cheese, the chili pepper, ghost pepper cheese. That's all. Okay. Sure.
And I mean, the cool thing about putting those additives on the cheese is that, well, not the cool thing, but just the thing to consider with that is, like we already said, the cheese has to age around 50 to 55 degrees. So whatever you put in, you can put it right into the milk when you're making the cheese, like if it's coffee grounds or spices or whatever. But you have to keep in mind that it's something that has to be able to be 50 degrees or something. So it can't be something perishable, basically. So that's kind of just an interesting thing to think about when there's the cheese additives. And then one other cheese additive, and we already just touched on it, was the blue cheese. Blue cheese is actually any cheese. You go through that whole same deal with the cheese making and cooking the milk and all of that. It can be goat's milk, it can be cow's milk, it can be reindeer milk, it can be whatever you want. But you add penicillin into it, and so it still looks like the regular cheese at the beginning, but then like a week later, you go through, and if you're a person who's making cheese at home, you can use like a knitting needle or a toothpick or something like that, and you basically poke these channels into the sides and all around the cheese. When you do that, that gives a place for the air to come in and for the blue part to grow. So that's how it makes blue cheese. Yeah. And so so blue cheese can be any cheese, so that gets tricky when you're putting it into a category of cheeses again, because it could be hard, it could be soft, it could be whatever you want, but it's that you add that penicillium into it and you get those blue marks. So that's how you make the blue cheese.
So it always like baffles me or whatever how certain things come about and then go, oh, this is good. Like, all right, so penicillin, all right, maybe that I can see that, that probably happened by accident the first time and somebody tasted it and all right, I get that. But like the Humboldt fog that's got, I don't know what type of cheese that is, but it's got ash in it. Like, honestly, who thinks, oh, I think I'll grab some ash and put it into cheese? Like, why?
And now, a word from our sponsor. Do you know that Dracaena Wines loves to give back? There are so many fur babies that deserve to find their forever home. We would love to be able to help as many of them as possible. If you are part of a nonprofit organization or know of a nonprofit organization that would like to hold a fundraiser, please contact us at contact@dracaenawines.com. So how does the fundraiser work? It's super simple and costs your group absolutely nothing. Together, we will choose a month that your group will be sponsored. During that month, you promote the fundraiser just as you would any other event you hold. At the end of the month, we will donate 20% of the total sales to your organization. The donations will be made in the name of each individual who purchases the wine so that you know exactly who helped the animals. Our goal is to raise as much funds as we possibly can and help as many animals as possible. And if you're in California or New Jersey, we can do something special for you. If the timing works, we can come and pour our wine for you. All we need is a table and glasses, and your members can taste the wine prior to purchasing. In these cases, we'll make the donation a week after the event. So please, help us help as many fur babies as we possibly can. Sláinte.
That's funny that you bring up the ash, because ash is actually a big thing in cheese making. One of the reasons that ash is made, or ash is put into the cheese, is because it reduces the acid in the cheese. By adding the ash, you reduce the pH, or you reduce the acid. It also helps mold grow better on the surface. So like that cannonball one that I had, was one of the ones where you can see that it's white in the middle, and then it has that little black line around it, and then it's a little bit more white around that. That's because they put the ash on there to help the mold grow around the surface of the cheese. But when you see it in the middle, the reason behind that was actually a really cool story that I learned back when I tried another cheese called Morbier. And when they were making Morbier, what they do is they would fill all of their molds their forms at the end of the night, but they wouldn't have enough milk to put all of the forms filled up to the top. So they would put a layer of ash on the top of it. That would actually help keep that milk that was half filled, basically, from spoiling or from getting too much moisture to go into the cheese overnight while they waited. So again, like the ash, just like you're saying with the penicillium, might have been a happy accident. Like maybe they were burning a candle and the ash fell on the milk or something like that. I mean,
well, I have to say,
why it happened, I don't know. But once it did, then they were like, "Oh, there's so many applications of putting ash in cheese." So
well, you mentioned Morbier, right?
Yeah.
And ash, and the first thing that went to my mind was, where were they getting the ash that they're calling it basically morbid? See, my brain goes right to the Latin, right to that, and I'm thinking, all right, well, okay, maybe not want that ash, you know?
Right. Well, and I have heard some of them are like a vegetable ash. So, I mean, again, talking about our vegetarian friends that want to know that they aren't having other things in there, I have heard a vegetable ash as well. Okay. So
much better than the dead body ash I'm thinking of.
Or like maybe if there was a fireplace burning or something, and that was the simplest thing because they didn't have heat, you know, back in the day, and the castle and whatever. So
we'll go with that, but just the name makes me go in that whole other direction. Makes me go in a whole other direction. All right, so let's take a particular cheese. Let's say like a Gouda or an Asiago, mostly because I love Gouda and Asiago. They can I have a Gouda that's a sheep, a Gouda that's a cow, or a Gouda that's a goat? Or does Gouda mean something specific? Is there reasoning behind those names, like Asiago or Gouda, or, you know?
Yes, there are reasons behind Asiago, Gouda, and a lot of the names, and usually what it is a town somewhere where they were made at the beginning. Asiago is an example of one that has the DOP standards or regulations, like the DOC and the DOCG and all of that. DOP just means that it's a protected origin. You have to have local farmers. You have to have traditional methods. And for Asiago in particular, that one actually has to be made at least 600 meters, like up on a mountain. Like that's one of the rules with Asiago. Gouda can be many milks and is many milks and is smoked and is aged and is semi-soft and is everything. Gouda is like the one that really makes you want to learn more because there's just so many different Goudas. And I love Gouda also. Me, I'm an aged Gouda person, but when I was first eating Gouda, I was looking at it and I'm like, there are every milk, there are every texture. I just don't know what Gouda is or what it means. And so when I looked into it, I found out that Gouda cheeses were traded in the Netherlands in Gouda. And all different cheesemakers came to Gouda to trade their cheese. And so Gouda is the tricky one because it's not really DOP or anything like that. It's Gouda cheese because Gouda was made in Gouda. And actually the way that you say it to be proper is Gouda.
Gouda. Okay.
Yeah. So if you want to be a cheese snob one day, tell someone you're eating some Gouda.
Stick my nose up the next time I go to a cheese shop. I'll have some Gouda, please.
But But it is funny because, like, as far as the DOP stuff goes, like, Parmigiano Reggiano, which everybody knows, Parmesan cheese. I mean, if you've ever seen a wheel of Parmesan, it's, like, ginormous. They're, like, 75 pounds. If you buy a wheel of Parmigiano Reggiano, it's, like, $2,500 to buy that wheel of cheese. But they get, like, a stamp of approval on it and, like, have to have inspections. And they're aged for a minimum of 16 months, and they have to be in that part of Italy that has those local cows, that has all of those standards, has those specific caves where they age it, all of that. So, I mean, some of them are definitely more loose than others as far as, like, why it's called this and where it's from. But one last one that's kind of funny is that Stilton was actually made in Stilton in the United Kingdom. And then, like, one day somebody was writing about cheese and they were like, oh, the Stilton made in Stilton isn't the real recipe of Stilton. The real ones are from Melton Mowbray or whatever, and they were like all, so you call it Stilton because you're from Stilton, but you're not. And so Stilton is like a weird one because now in Stilton, they're not allowed to make Stilton. So it's like really bizarro when you start researching any of the stories. But yeah, I mean, it is really fun to learn about the different ones and try to figure out, like, why is it called this? Like, Brie is actually a part in France outside of Paris. Like, that's why it's called Brie, because there's Brie, France. But, I mean, all of that being said, you know, there's people not in Brie, France that make Brie, and, you know, it gets tricky because, like, as long as it doesn't have that DOP stamp on it, saying that this is DOP and whatever, just like with wine and olive oil and all of that, you know, you're kind of allowed to say it. But that's also why you have a cheese that might be called, like, Gold Hill, which has nothing to do with anything. You have no idea what Gold Hill is until you see it. But, like, some places name it after, like, a flower or whatever, and just they like the name. So that's kind of how people get around the regulations of the cheese DOP and all of that also.
Okay, so it's very equivalent to champagne, right? Champagne can only be made in Champagne. You can make a champagne-style sparkling wine, but because of the regulations, you cannot legally call it champagne. So, all right, kind of cool. All right. Now, the next thing is, and this is near and dear to me because Mike does not allow me to bring feta cheese into the house. And I cannot really argue with him because the smell of fish makes me nauseous. And I've been gone for a week, and he would cook when I was gone, and I'd come in, I'm like, you had fish. Right? So I can't really argue with him. He does not like the smell of feta. And so I don't know if this is a word or I'm making it up, but like the pungency of a cheese, if that's a word, you know, that funk, whatever it is, that blue cheese funk or that feta cheese, which I don't know why it smells like that, but like, is there a classification, you know, for, you know, like the German wines have the regulations of, you know, the Cabernet, you know, the Spatleys, you know, all of that. Is there something like that for cheese?
Well, I mean, as far as like funk in cheese goes, I mean, that is a little tricky. And I know funk isn't necessarily pungency, but like when you're talking about funk in cheese, like, one of the really funny things about that is that when you smell a cheese that is a cow cheese or is a goat cheese or something like that, a lot of times you smell those animals. Like, it makes you think that you're, like, at the farm. And you're like, ooh, I smell goats, and ooh, I smell hay, and whatever. So, I mean, the aroma of cheese is a tricky one because, I mean, feta is really heavily brined when it's made. So it basically just sits in salt water while you're making it. So that definitely is why it makes you think of fish, because it probably just smells like the ocean to you in general because of all that salt in feta cheese. But there are different cheeses that have different flavors depending on when the animal was milked. And that can be really cool because if you get like a fall cheese, it'll smell like hay, it'll smell like leaves, it'll totally make you think of fall. And if you get a spring cheese, it'll smell like grass and it'll smell fresh. Those are some of the different categories. Again, since there's 9 million categories for cheese, you can think about it as far as the season goes also. And that same animal, as far as I know, if you had like, you know, cow 102 in the field or whatever, and you had their milk in the spring and in the fall, it should taste differently because of eating those different things. But definitely as far as feta goes, the reason it's so salty is because it lives in salt water, basically. So that one, that's an easy answer on that one.
Okay. So what characteristics do you look for when you're trying to pair a cheese to the wine? And do you think it's easier to start with the cheese and pair the wine to the cheese, or start with the wine and pair the cheese to the wine? Or it doesn't matter which one you start with, it's still the same process?
In the beginning, we actually just had a list of these are some suggested wine and cheese pairings. And so that was how we got started. And that actually is the reason for our name of our blog being Wine and Cheese Friday, was that basically it was to force us to have a date night, to sit down, to have wine and cheese, and to just stop working and make sure that we enjoyed ourselves for a little bit. So we started out with that list in the beginning, and like I said, we've done 150 pairings now. There's a lot of things that kind of just, you know, you just kind of have this feeling like, oh, well, of course that's going to go with a Gouda, or of course that would be a smoky cheese or something like that. I mean, you just kind of, it's definitely a thing from experience. But one of our most recent pairings that we did was a Merlot with a blueberry-coated goat cheese log. When we were coming up with that one, we actually found the cheese first. So we found the cheese. We said, this cheese has blueberries. I bet a Merlot or some other red wine with a lot of fruit would go well with this one, with this cheese. So in that case, we chose the cheese first. There's other times where I'm on some Twitter chat and somebody talks about a wine and I go, ooh, they were just talking about this wine. I want to do this for one of our wine and cheese pairings. And so I start with the wine because it's a wine that I've heard about before and I want to try it. And then I either roll the dice on would this cheese work, or, oh, I think this cheese would definitely work. There's definitely characteristics that I've figured out through the years and that I've talked to people through the years for how to choose which wines and cheeses to go together. One of the easiest ones is if the wine and the cheese come from the same area, typically they're going to go together.
Okay. What grows together goes together.
Exactly right. What grows together goes together. And that's a really easy one to remember too because it rhymes. So I mean that one is a good one. There's like sweet wines with blue cheeses. That's always another kind of no-brainer. The funk in the cheese just works really well with the sweetness of the wine. They can play off each other. They can cut each other down. They can enhance each other. And so that's another one. Sparkling wine go great with cheeses. The sparkling wine cuts the fat in the cheese. and actually cleanses your palate. So it's a really fun effect because you taste the cheese and then basically the wine cleans the cheese out of your mouth. And then you taste the cheese again, and then it just keeps going back and forth, and it's like kind of a fun cycle. Then there's another thing that we've learned that does not work well together, and that is a high alcohol wine with a salty aged cheese. Typically that's kind of a no-no because when you do that, all the alcohol comes out of the wine from the salt. And then you're just like, oh man, all I taste is alcohol. So that's one of the things that typically we would advise against because you're not going to have a fun wine and cheese experience then. But yeah, those are some of our examples of how you know which ones go together.
Good rules, good rules. One of the things that always drives me crazy when it comes to cheese is the rind. So, you know, I sit there and like I look at a brie and it's like this flaky little thing. And I don't know if you're supposed to eat it or not eat it, but you can't peel that stuff off. Like you'll be there for 10 hours peeling the stuff off. And brie is so creamy that, you know, you just take it and put it on there and you're not really tasting that anyway. But then there's other ones that I'm like, all right, I am cutting this off. Like the manchego we have last night, we cut off the rind. What are we supposed to be doing with that rind? How do you know whether to eat it, not to eat it? Are you always supposed to eat it?
Well, with the manchego, you did the right thing on that. You're not supposed to eat a manchego rind, but one of the really different things, if you looked at that manchego rind, you might have noticed that it looked like it had a design on it.
Yeah, it looks like a cantaloupe. Like it
looks like a what?
It kind of looks like a plastic-sized cantaloupe. Like it, you know, like the outside of a cantaloupe. It reminds me of that, but it's a design, yes.
Yeah. Well, the way that happens is originally when they would age manchego, they would put it in a basket. So that's why it looks like that. And that part is something you could eat, but you're not going to enjoy it because it's just super hard, and it's basically the shell. Once the cheese is being aged, it starts to dry out a little bit. And so in the case of the manchego, it's aged for quite a while, and that outer layer just basically gets dried out. So you're not going to eat a manchego rind. You can eat a brie rind as a note of, you know, word of caution or whatever. The rind on a brie is mold. That is the mold that is creating the inside gooey deliciousness that we all love in brie. And it's called soft ripened because it puts the mold on the outside and then basically digests the cheese on the inside. And that's how it gets soft. So you can eat that rind. I eat that rind. But if you don't eat that rind, you're basically only getting half of the cheese because that rind is meant to be part of the flavor. If you want to eat it, you can. If you don't eat it, nobody's really going to yell at you. But then there's also wax rinds. And if you find a cheese that has a wax rind on it, like Gouda, typically those are pretty obvious because they're like red or black.
And they peel off like in a...
yeah, some color that you can just see, this is not food. I'm taking this off. So as a rule, a lot of the rinds you probably can eat, but if you try to eat it and you either realize that it's wax or it's way too hard to chew, probably just take the rest of it off and you're good to go. But one of the cheese rind stories that we have that's really funny is, I don't know if you've ever had the Drunken Goat cheese.
Yes.
But a Drunken Goat is soaked in wine. So it's purple on the outside and the rind is wine. It's soaked in wine. We were at my dad's house and he cut the rind off because he thought, oh, it's the rind. I need to cut it off. And then we were like, oh, that's all the wine. Where'd it go? So funny because you never know. But it is. thing that people question. They're not sure. I mean, other cheese rinds are soaked in beer.
Right.
So, I mean, if you like beer and you want to eat that, you can eat that rind too. But, like I said, it's kind of the idea of you should maybe just taste a little bit of it. And if you think it's good, good.
Go for it.
If you don't think it's good, all right.
Right. That's a good, start small, taste a little bite. If it's plastic, cut it away, basically. All right. So my next question, I don't really want to know the answer to, but I think it's important to know. What exactly is a typical serving size for cheese? Because, like, that manchego we purchased at Costco, so it's like this big, and we like half of it at a sitting. And I'm pretty confident that is not one serving of cheese. So part of me doesn't want to know the answer, but we got to know the answer to that.
Well, and the simple answer there is that a serving size of cheese is 1 ounce. Just 1 ounce. And I actually went to a cheese tasting once where they said, we're going to taste 5 cheeses today, and each cheese that we've given to you on your plate is 1 ounce of cheese. So you could see what it looked like. And so that was really cool, and definitely, for real, an educational experience, because how do you know what 1 ounce of cheese looks like? Right. Nobody has, like, a food balance where they're like, oh, let me measure out my 1 ounce of cheese. So, I mean, so that was a really cool thing to find out. When you buy a wedge in the store, I really couldn't tell you how much that wedge of manchego was, since it was Costco and they're all bigger there. But typically a wedge of cheese is like 8 ounces. Like if you get a piece of brie, or if you get, a piece of blue cheese, or any of those pre-cut ones in the cheese case at wherever you shop, those are usually around 8 ounces. So that would be 8 servings of cheese. But, it's kind of the rule, you just have everything in moderation. You just don't eat that entire giant thing of manchego every day. Like you go, well, it's been a couple days since I had cheese, so I'll just wait and have some more now.
The shem that has the blueberries over it, that you were talking about earlier, I can pretty much eat half of that in one sitting. And if not more than half of that. Like, if I could go to town on that stuff, take my little cracker, take my little cheese plate, cut it in, pop the whole thing in my mouth. Teeth are blue, purple, whatever, doesn't matter. I'm going to town for the next one. The next thing I know, that whole little log, but that at least is only 4 ounces. They usually sell that only.
Some of them are smaller,
Yeah, 4 ounces. But I can go to town on that stuff. So, all right.
That's how we are with brie. Anytime we get brie, we like look down and we're like, oh, it's all gone.
All gone. And then, I love brie, but I really love brie when you add to it, when you put it in like the pie shell or whatever, and you make that and then you bake it and put blackberry jam on it, oh my God, heaven on earth is melted brie with blackberry. No.
It's really good with apples also.
Yeah.
When you bake it like that.
Yeah. All right. So continuing on that realm, again, another question I don't really want to know the answer to. So we know a serving size is 1 ounce, but the calories that are in that 1 ounce, does, like, just a generalization, does cow have more calories than sheep, or sheep have more goat, or or are they all basically the same? It doesn't matter.
The calories in cheese, I'm not sure if it would correlate with the animals, but I do know that it has to do with the moisture that's in the cheese. Okay. So, like, a fresh cheese has more moisture And so it has less calories, basically, because there's liquid. But that manchego that we both want to eat, or that aged Gouda or something like that that's been aging for 2 years, really doesn't have much liquid left in it. So those are the ones to watch out for.
All right.
If we guess 3 ounces instead of 1, we'll be a little more generous with that.
Yeah.
If we guess 3 ounces, our Gouda would be almost 400 calories for 3 ounces of Gouda. But our brie would be a little less. It would be like 350. And our mozzarella would only be like 250. So mozzarella is typically a lot more moist, if you're looking at the texture again, than the Gouda would be.
So I can eat that.
Than the brie.
I could eat that whole ball of burrata then and feel fine.
You could probably be all right with that, yeah, because I mean, a salad is like 300 calories. So if you're having a piece of cheese instead, it's the same.
All right.
So.
All right. I like that because I prefer the softer. Mike likes the harder cheeses, but I like the bries. I like the chèvre, however you say it. Those, I like those better. And those are the ones that when I'm eating by myself, so I go to town on. The manchego or the Asiagos or whatever, Mike is cutting it up, and he's cutting them up into the small little pieces, and we're sharing.
Right.
So, all right, I'm not as bad as I thought that was going to be. So, we are getting close to an hour. We're actually just at about an hour. But before we go, I have to ask you, what is, in memory, your best pairing, and then obviously, you got to share the story of your biggest disaster of a pairing.
Well, do you want to hear about a red wine or a white wine?
Whatever you think was, that one cheese and wine pairing that you were like, damn, this is good. We'll do that one first.
All right. Well, we were already talking about brie and how whenever I look down, it's gone. So we actually did one that was a white blend with a brie. And the white blend had like 4 grapes in it, and you could taste like all 4 grapes, which was really cool. And when we did the pairing, we were doing it with Neil's mom. My goal in doing a wine and cheese pairing is to find out how the wine and the cheese play off of each other and what happens. So if you get some kind of noticeable, like, oh, what? Where did that come from? That's my goal when I do a wine and cheese pairing. And when we did this white blend with brie, the brie tasted like walnuts or pistachios. Like totally just appeared because we had it with the wine. And so for me, that's my goal. Any pairing that I do that I can get something that stands out, and sometimes it's not good. Like I've had one where like I could feel like my taste buds all like stood up like they were like soldiers or something. But even that I would say is an interesting pairing. Maybe it wasn't a good pairing.
Right.
But I like those reactions. So that time with the white blend and the brie, because we got those flavors of nuts, I mean, we've done other pairings where we've gotten flavors of like mustard that just like kind of comes out of nowhere, and like those are the kinds of pairings that I like. So those are the ones I'd say are our best pairings. We did have a disaster pairing also. I mentioned that we've made cheese a few times, and I would say overall our cheese making has really come out awesome. And we've been like, oh my God, this is like the best science project ever, because you have to watch it and you record your data and you have to do this, and I love it. But we made cheese one time with my niece and my nephew, and it was our second time making chev. We had made chev the first time. It was beautiful. We rolled it in rosemary. I mean, people were like, oh, you bought that at the store. And I'm like, no, I just made it. But the second time we made the chev, we made it with my niece and nephew. and it just was terrible. And I was like looking at it like, I've made Chev. Like, what is happening right now? Because we're doing all the same things that I did. And so in the end, we're draining it, and it's just not happening. And it is this big pile of mush, basically. And it never dried out. And so we figured out that we didn't make Chev that day. We made, I think it was like called fromage blanc, I believe, instead. And in order to try to salvage it, after I did this with my niece and nephew, I was like, oh, now we're going to do this with a wine and cheese pairing. And I'm going to bring my brothers in. We're all going to try this cheese. But that cheese was terrible. And there was really just no salvaging it. And to make matters even worse, we paired it with a pumpkin wine because I was in New England and it was the fall, and I was like, oh, pumpkin wine, we have to try that. Of course, we'll make the cheese, we'll pair it with pumpkin wine. There was nothing good said about that pairing at all. People didn't like the wine. They didn't want the cheese. We tried to eat it with a spoon because it wasn't solid enough to be a cheese. What we ended up finding out in the end, which for anybody out there that's trying to make cheese themselves, we found out that what we used was called ultra-pasteurized milk. Well, people have heard of pasteurized, people have heard of homogenized, but when it's ultra-pasteurized, that basically means they cook it like crazy to really make sure that the bacteria is gone. And when they do that, they basically damage the milk. And once the milk is damaged, you can't make cheese with it. And yeah, there was a disclaimer, but it was on the bottom of the back of the directions, and I didn't read that. So that's why it didn't work, because we used the wrong milk, but we didn't know. But yeah, then we added way too much salt, and like I said, it was just a pretty terrible pairing. And I'm
but
sure
you learned,
my brothers now.
But you learned about ultra-pasteurized milk, so it was a learning experience.
Exactly. Again, more education.
Right. All right, so I was so excited that we were able to get this together because next week is Cheese Day. And all honesty, I don't know why I didn't know there was a cheese day, because A, there's a day for everything, and B, I love cheese. So tell us a little bit about the day, when it is, what people can do to celebrate. If you and Neil, Wine Cheese Friday, are doing anything special in honor of it, tell us about the day and what you're doing for it.
Well, it's June 4th, so to know the date is June 4th. And Dairy Month is actually in June. Like, that is what June is. And right now, May is American Cheese Month. So, I mean, like you said, all of these things are everywhere, and you really have to, like, just watch Twitter for what's trending or whatever, look for someone who loves to announce those holidays. But we actually have a wine and cheese holiday calendar on our website. So if you want to know when the cheese holidays are, it's in the sidebar. Just look for the calendar. Because, I mean, there's Cheese Lover Day, there's Cheese Day, there's Wine and Cheese Day, there's Grilled Cheese Day, I think there's Mac and Cheese Day. I mean, like, there's a lot of them out there. As far as what we're going to do, I mean, we're going to eat some cheese. We'll probably pair it with wine as far as what Maria and Neil are doing. But as far as what Wine and Cheese Friday is doing, I'll definitely put together some like fun cheese factoids to post on social media throughout the day. But we actually got to be featured on a Twitter chat another year, like 3 years ago, for Cheese Day. So I love it. I'm glad I'm the cheese resource and that people know to come to me for it. And if you need to know when Cheese Day is and you forget that I had the calendar, you can always just ask me again next year.
All right. So as with all of our Allure with the Pours, we always end up with the game of opposites. So I don't have any cheese questions in the game of opposites. So
we're going to have to settle for the wine aspect of Wine and Cheese Friday. We're going to start off with non-food items or non-wine items, and then we'll go to wine stuff. Okay?
All right.
All right. So, as always, no right or wrong answer. Just tell me which one you think, resonates with you better. Okay?
Okay.
We got night or day?
Day.
Sunset or sunrise?
Sunset.
Black or white?
Black.
Walk or run?
Walk.
Food or drink?
Food.
Old world, new world?
New world.
Sweet or dry?
Dry.
Red or white?
White.
Bubbles or still?
Bubbles.
Oak or stainless?
Oak.
Drink now or drink later?
Drink now.
Blend or varietal?
Blend.
Vintage or non-vintage?
Vintage.
Napa or Sonoma?
Sonoma.
Commercial or indigenous?
Commercial.
Bordeaux or Rhone?
Rhone.
Warm climate or cool climate?
Warm climate.
Ta-da! That's it. Warm climate. Paso, baby. Paso. All right, so before we sign off for the night, first of all, thank you very much for spending your evening with me and teaching me all of the cool stuff about cheese. And even though I know I gained 5,000 pounds because I eat so much cheese, I'm still going to eat all that cheese. And I'm happier now that I eat the soft cheese or, the fresh cheese.
Right.
That makes me happier. But before we head off, can you tell everybody what your website is, where they can find you on social media, and let's do one fact. If you're gonna want to learn one thing about cheese, what's that fact?
My one fact that I didn't mention earlier, but it's super important, is that you should let your cheese warm up before you eat it. Big important fact. The flavors and the aromas are volatile in cheese, and if you don't let it warm up, you're not getting the full experience of the cheese. So that's super important. But you can find me on wineandcheesefriday.com is my website. My Twitter is winecheesefry. My Instagram is winecheesefry.
And that's F-R-I, like Friday.
Like Friday, that's right. My Facebook fan page is Wine and Cheese Friday, all spelled out. So, you know how it goes. It's some version of Wine and Cheese Friday in however many letters you are allowed to use or whatever. But yeah, that's where you can find me, and I'm glad we got to do this too. This was fun.
That's
you never really know how anything's going to pan out. So I think it was a good time.
It was. I learned so much, and like I said, I eat cheese all the time, but I'm just eating it. So it's kind of cool to learn, really how it's made and what what it takes to make the cheese and all that stuff. So thank you very much for joining and for sharing your cheese expertise with my listeners. And I will see you on the socials.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you very much too, Lori. I appreciate it. And I'll definitely be talking to you again soon.
Have a great night. This has been another episode of Exploring the Wineglass. Thanks for listening. If you have suggestions on what topics you would like me to discuss, please reach out on social media. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as Exploring the Wineglass. I'm also on LinkedIn as Lori Hoyt-Budd. Of course, you can always email me at exploringthewineglass@gmail.com. If you enjoyed our podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher to help others find me more easily. Until next week, sláinte!